Hello, everyone. It's been a month, which is pretty amazing that I've put something up so quickly. So, yesterday was the beginning of Chinese New Year, the year of the tiger, and I would never have known that in the past. When I was 15, Deities and Demigods dropped. I probably would have got it when I was 16 or 17 years old. I grew up in a household that was very kind of what we used to call waspish, white Anglo Saxon Protestant. Our meals were kind of meat and potatoes, and special occasions would be kind of meatballs covered in a canned garlic sauce. That was about as ethnic as we got. Pasta was something that was never on the table as my mom couldn't stand it. And pizzas came in little mini pizzas, two of them stuck together. I'm not too sure if they were McCain's at the time, but that was ethnic food for us. I remember that my parents' cupboard had probably about 15 spices and herbs combined. And a good amount of those were garlic powder, garlic salt, celery salt, stuff like that. And so I didn't grow up in this kind of broad culture. As I said in my previous video, I'm a priest, and so I grew up in the church, and the church kind of looked at things from a different perspective, kind of supporting people in Africa, supporting indigenous people in the north. But it was so uncomfortable at the time that it was not something that made me aware of different cultures. So when I obtained deities and demigods, back in the early 80s, it was a revelation to me. I, I wasn't a great student at the time. I didn't realize I was dyslexic, and neither did my parents. And I was just coming to realize that social situations did make me very introverted, and there were consequences to that. And so one of them was is that I spent a lot of time away from school. I spent a lot of time at home reading as opposed to going to class. I think I had thousands of ways of expressing to my parents how ill I was on that particular day as to why I couldn't go to school. And what I did was I either looked at the World Book Encyclopedia, the closest thing to the internet that we had in those days, and D&D. And when Deities and Demigods came out, and I had already read The Hobbit, and I think I had started The Lord of the Rings at that point, but fantasy was just that. I mean, the closest thing we had on television was um, Rocket Robin Hood, which wasn't fantasy, of course. It was science fiction fantasy. Love that show. And another one was, and I was really young at the time. Like, I still remember being in my old home, which was pre 9 years old, and I remember seeing very early in the morning Ultraman, the Japanese live action, uh, uh, amazing, right? But that wasn't, that was about the breadth of cultural expression. When I was going to high school, we had a couple of students who were African American, I guess you'd say, Canadian, and they were children of a teacher who was there at our school, and we had probably about a quarter, maybe a little bit less than a quarter of our population were uh, native indigenous peoples from a reserve that was not that far away from the school, and we were the feeder school for them. And so that was about it. I think we had one Jewish sister and brother in the school, and that was it. Deities and demigods opened up a whole new world for me. Now, I've marked down some of the chapters or some of the kind of mythos that had been expressed. So there was the American Indian mythos. So, I mean, that blew me away. Arthurian heroes, I mean, I knew about Arthurian heroes and that was cool and all. I think at the time I had Kingmaker. And so I was learning about the War of the Roses and so Arthurian heroes and all of that. It was all kind of the same stuff and stuff that we still see in D&D today. Babylonian myth, something that I had never even thought about. The Gilgamesh stories and the issues of those things, which I ended up learning in seminary, but it was like, and McGill, I went to McGill for my BTH, and then I did seminary work after that. Um, and Celtic mythos, things that I guess I had taken for granted and didn't realize. Central American mythos, Chinese, and then there, Cthulhu and stuff like that, Egyptian. I had learned about some of that stuff in grade school, but again, it was something that we covered because it was cool. Osiris and the river Styx and stuff like that. But it never really dawned on me until I was in my 16s, 17s that there was a world far beyond this myopic kind of structure that I had seen through the lens of Christianity, and a broad church Christianity. It was Anglican, and so I went to kind of I wouldn't say fundamentalist, but I would say it started off being very broad in its openness, and then it became very narrow as a new priest came in, and so it became much more evangelical. And so I grew up kind of that way, and then I switched over to a different church, and which was in the Anglican Church, more toward the Catholic side with bells and smells and all that stuff. And so it was an interesting kind of way of seeing beyond that very narrow minded view of the world. I mean, to think that there was Finnish mythos, Greek mythos, which everybody kind of knew about at the time because, of course, we were Western centric in our history courses and stuff like that. East Indian mythos, and then, of course, Japanese. And there were some other things which I can't even pronounce, and I think that they were particular to books. And Norse being different from Finnish, and then Sumerian. Again, it opened up my eyes to a world that I hadn't even imagined. So, why am I doing this today? Well, it's not just because it was Chinese New Year's yesterday, and today is the year of the tiger. I was driving in the car with my daughter, and we were coming back from an appointment, and we generally listen to a wide range of music again. And I would say, pointing back to this time, that this was very much in part a reason why I wanted to have the breadth of experience. And we were listening to CBC Radio 2, which is the equivalent of, I guess, NPR or PBS in the States. I'm not sure. I don't listen to American radio, but I would imagine that that's similar. It's kind of the classical music hour, and they do more kind of alternative types of music. And they had a piece of Ravi Shankar playing the sitar, and I was thoroughly enjoying it. And I was thinking to myself, I never would have enjoyed this if I hadn't gone for a curry in Montreal when I lived there, and of course developed a great repertoire of cooking at home. But it was D&D that got me into thinking about the breadth of myth. Now, I remember PBS, and I remember watching Joseph Campbell talking about the power of myth. And I guess at the time, 77 came out and Star Wars was there. And of course, I never made the link between, these 12 steps and of course, Star Wars, which was really built upon his work. But there was something there that was driving me to different cultures and this openness to appreciate different ways of life. What I'm seeing online recently, whether it's discourse on Facebook or discourse on Instagram or Twitter or wherever you get your social media, or even just going to CNN, BBC, Reuters, Al Jazeera, CBC, those are kind of the places that I generally go. You're going to see this very limited approach where we're not appreciating each other, where we're just getting more and more narrow. Now, I watch a lot of YouTube. I don't watch traditional TV at all. And the YouTube channels that I watch are very diverse. And one of them is Lymphemy. And Lymphemy is going through a whole bunch of kind of Japanese cultural, a kind of animated approach to the dissemination of information. And his channels are awesome, or his channel is awesome, and the information that he gives is absolutely fantastic. And I think I was listening to the one of his early ones on Japanese history, just watching it again, and he spoke about how I believe it was the Yayoi brought agriculture to the Jamon. We'll see if somebody corrects me in the comments, but and the way that he approached that was to say that one of the ways that we that the culture began to fight each other was because agriculture developed, and agriculture meant that this group had more than another group, as opposed to us all sharing, as opposed to us all being in it for one. And there's a different culture, there's a very different culture between the West and the East. And the more I notice this, the more I appreciate Eastern culture. And if you're going to bitch about atrocities and stuff like that, certainly, but all cultures have atrocities. And the States is no different than Canada or Britain or I'm sure Norway, even. I mean, every country has this propensity to divide up and say, I'm going to conquer you because I want your stuff. I want what you have worked for and you've gained, and I want that stuff. And so Lymphemy was making this connection between the agrarian society and aggression. And I thought about that. And so, anyway, my wife and I were watching this show yesterday. It was like a 5 hour English speaking Chinese kind of tour de force from Beijing, celebrating and leading up to the countdown of the new year. And we were kind of skipping through it. We didn't watch it live. We just skipped through it to kind of celebrate the day. Why not? And there was translations of the songs that they were singing. And the songs that they were singing were about friendship and about coming together and about camaraderie and about unity. And I know that we can complain about the disunity with the Tibetan peoples and the Taiwanese people and the people of Hong Kong and uh, every culture. I mean, we can complain about people who live in the States who are in the South as compared to the North, or the East compared to the West. We have the same problems in Canada, where we currently have truckers, mainly from the West, who are now occupying our capital in Ottawa, and doing so in a way that expresses their discontent. Whether I agree or disagree is inconsequential. What's important is that we've stopped looking at the breadth of expression and understanding. And we're becoming increasingly myopic in our views. And that's something that D&D originally set out to broaden our education. It was filled with people who were educated and willing to kind of look beyond the norm. It started with Napoleonic warfare at a table, and then it narrowed down to being a game where each person was a commander, and that individuality became even more focused on fantasy um, as it evolved. And it evolved in a very Western way. And now, as I look at games like Vaesen and Coriolis and Forgotten Realms, especially Forgotten Realms, I want to see beyond just what they're presenting in their worldview and apply things that I see, say, in anime. Um, and maybe you're kind of thinking, well, what the hell is he doing watching anime? Well, there's amazing visuals, the history in the art that's expressed. And I mean, we're not talking about kind of silly animes and stuff like that. We're talking about animes that have some level of depth. Now, I do watch Demon Slayer, and I'm kind of addicted to it now every week. But I mean, you look at kind of the Meiji period that's being expressed in the visuals. Of course, you've got the action and you've got the character development and all that stuff. And, it's very anime. But there's a backdrop. And I think that's what I'm looking for in tabletop role playing. And what I'm looking for in the way that we speak to each other and address each other here on the internets, in the way that we approach this hobby that we love. It should have breadth. We shouldn't just dismiss D&D 5.5 or D&D 5 or whatever. I'm personally done with that corporate approach. But that's me. I'm looking for something that's different. And whether it comes in Dodeca, which I spoke about in the last episode, in a kind of micro game, or if it comes in, say, a bigger publisher like Free League or Modifius, I'm looking for something that's expressing things differently. I think that Thousand Islands is coming out with a role-playing game set in, I believe it's Malaysia. And they have loads of kind of zines that are absolutely beautiful, that express the culture there. So when you're looking at cultural, the world around you, truly look at it and embrace it for the games that you want to play and borrow from it. I think that, my daughter is an artist, and she's actually in a class today about Indigenous people and hearing from an elder. And cultural appropriation is something that comes up quite often in our drives home from school. And I understand, but there's part of me that says I want to appreciate different cultures. I want to see beyond my limited scope, my limited experience. And I want to be able to draw upon other cultures, other mythos, like they did in Deities and Demigods way back, in 1980. We should be trying to purchase and support, and I'm a big supporter of this, smaller publishers that are trying to draw on different cultures and different expressions of myth and fantasy, so that we're not just simply stuck in either a Tolkien-esque fantasy world, or, a Cthulhian type of world, or a D&D myth type of world. And let's face it, it's got its own mythos, and it's not just Forgotten Realms. I think that we need to have the breadth of understanding to really truly appreciate the hobby. And we shouldn't be trying to compartmentalize everybody else in our own beliefs or our own attractions. I really like what's happening in Eastern cultures, and I'm learning a lot about it. And maybe I'll use it in tabletop role playing, maybe I won't. But I appreciate it. I'm not appropriating it, I'm appreciating it for what it is. And I think you should be free to be able to do so. It just like we shouldn't be telling people how they should play D&D. If you want a character instant kill because you're only allowed 8 hit points, and you're level 3 or something like that, that's fine. Play that way. And if you want to be a superhero and you want to play the D&D 5e style, go for it. Whether you love crit roll or hate crit roll, whether you've watched the shows, I haven't watched the shows, or have watched the shows and are loving it, you should be able to appreciate other expressions as well. And not just say, this is the only way. There's far too much of that in politics. There's far too much of that in our economic system. There's far too much of that in our race relations, to be honest. We need to start appreciating the whys and wherefores of other cultures. And D&D, I think, is a platform, or role-playing is a platform for us to be able to do that. So that's kind of my spiel for today. No fancy little pictures or drops or anything like that in this video. And I kept myself pretty good at 22 minutes, so I'm happy about that. So I hope you appreciate this, and maybe it resonates, maybe it doesn't. Maybe you're happy just looking at one particular worldview and you're satisfied. But I'd encourage you, look beyond. Go on YouTube and do one of those walks in Shanghai, or look at what's going on in Finland. I recently watched the Luxury Traveler, I think that's what his name is, go to Namibia and go to kind of this spa, 5-star resort in the middle of the desert in Nambia. It's amazing, and the world is there for us that it wasn't there when I was a teenager. And this can help you gain not only a greater appreciation and a greater education, but can also help you hone your skills as a GM, as a player. You can apply these things. Think about that. It made me think yesterday about these songs about friendship and about non-individualism. There's something that's positive about that as well, especially during these COVID times where we really should be supporting each other no matter where you find yourself on any debate at this point. So take care. I hope this has been helpful. Do make a comment, and if you find this helpful, liking and subscribing does help. But this is going to be a conversational style. David had mentioned it in a previous episode, depending on what you want to do. Do you want to just converse and have brain farts? Or do you want to have something that's polished like Trevor DeVal on Me, Myself, and I? I'd rather just blabber on and be me so that you hear my thoughts for whatever they're worth. So anyway, take care. I do appreciate those who have viewed. I know that I've had a couple of new subscribers recently, and that always kind of kicks me in the backside and says, oh God, I've got to do something. So here I am. Anyway, take care, everybody. Play great games. Use whatever cultural stuff you want. Just be respectful of each other. Take care.